I want you to close your eyes for a second. Well, don't close them if you're driving. But picture this. It is a perfect, cool summer day. The air is crisp. The grass is that incredibly deep, vibrant green that you really only find in the English countryside. You're standing in Stoke Poges, just a stone's throw from Windsor Castle. It's quiet, it's peaceful. The source material describes it as perhaps the world's most civilized pasture.
It sounds idyllic, like a postcard.
It does. But here's the twist. You aren't in a park. You're in a graveyard. And you aren't just looking at the scenery. You're standing over the bones of people who 300 years ago were the absolute movers and shakers of their world. The influencers, the CEOs, the politicians of the 18th century. And now, it's just silence.
That image it's the perfect anchor for today's deep dive. We are unpacking a really unique and honestly quite profound piece of source material today. We're looking at a cultural and theological commentary from Pastor Hu Zikong, dated February 3, 2026.
2026. So this feels very immediate, very fresh.
Exactly. And what I love about this source is that he doesn't, start with a lecture. He starts with a road trip. He takes us to this specific graveyard to bridge a gap of centuries. He connects that scene in Stoke Poges to 18th century poetry. And then, and this is the part that really surprised me, he slams it right into the context of modern workplace ethics.
It's a wild mix. We've got English poetry, serious theology, and career advice all in one bucket. The central theme on the table today is glory. And I have to be honest, when I hear the word glory, my brain usually goes to, I don't know, a sports movie or maybe a really intense sunrise. It's one of those words we use but don't really think about.
That's a fair point. It's a word that has lost a bit of its weight. But the mission of this deep dive is to unpack the contrast the source draws between two very different types of glory. On one side, you have human achievement, what the source calls the paths of glory. And on the other side, you have this theological definition of God's glory.
And the kicker is how that definition changes the way you answer emails on a Tuesday morning.
Precisely. It turns the mundane into something much bigger.
Okay, let's go back to the grass in Stoke Poges. Why is this specific spot so important to the source? Is it just because it's pretty?
No, it's literary history. This location is the setting for one of the most famous poems in the English language, Carnbes Gray's Elegy, written in a country churchyard.
Ah, the classics. I vaguely remember skimming this in high school English class, mostly hoping the bell would ring.
You and everyone else. But it's a staple for a reason. Pastor Hugh recounts visiting this spot with his wife, standing in that ancient cemetery, and recalling specific lines from Gray's poem. The poem is basically a meditation on mortality. It lists all the things we spend our lives chasing. Gray talks about heraldry, which is like your status, your family crest, your brand, and the pomp of power.
The pomp of power, that's a phrase that sticks. It feels elegant, but also kind of biting. It sounds a lot like the modern corporate ladder or the way we obsess over titles.
It is biting. Gray is looking at all the pageantry we wrap around our lives, beauty, wealth, power, and he delivers a brutal punchline. He writes that all of these things await an inevitable moment.
And then comes the famous line.
The paths of glory lead but to the grave.
Oof. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. It is.
Oh, it's bleak.
It is bleak.
It makes all that striving feel a bit futile, doesn't it? Like, if the destination is identical for the king and the peasant, why are we running so hard? Why bother trying to get the promotion if we all end up under the same grass?
And that is the exact existential crisis the source wants to provoke. Before we can talk about purpose, we have to confront the end. The source argues that human glory is inherently tragic because it has an expiration date. It's a finite resource. It doesn't matter how much glory you accumulate in terms of awards, money, or admiration. The destination, the grave, is the great equalizer. It's interesting because the source mentions that even the most civilized pastor is still just a waiting room for the end. It sounds like my reaction is what's intended, really a bit of shock. Like, if that's true, is everything meaningless?
That's the tension. If human glory just evaporates when we die, is life just a joke? This is where the source pivots. It moves from the melancholy of the English graveyard to a counter-argument found in biblical theology, specifically referencing the book of 1 Peter chapter 1.
Okay, so let's unpack this pivot. We go from everything ends in death to what? What is the alternative to the grave?
The alternative is an inheritance. The source contrasts the grave with something described as incorruptible, undefiled, and unfading.
Those are heavy theological words. Incorruptible.
Right, think about food. Food rots, it corrupts. Think about clothes, they fade, they get defiled. The source is saying that human fame is like food or clothes, it eventually spoils. But this God's glory is different. It's shelf-stable for eternity.
Okay, but this brings me back to my earlier problem. What does God's glory actually mean? Because again, I'm picturing clouds and harps.
And that's the common misconception. The source argues that glory isn't just a single attribute. It's not just God being holy or wise. The definition provided here is that glory is the sum total of everything God is and does.
The sum total. Can you give me an analogy?
Think of a diamond. The glory of the diamond isn't just one facet. It's the way the light hits the whole thing, the weight of it, the composition, the clarity. It's the entire package. The source says God's glory is the signature on all his works.
The signature, I like that. So when the source quotes Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, it's saying the universe is basically signed artwork.
Precisely. The source points out that this glory is universal.
Yeah.
It's in the wisdom and power of his thoughts. It's visible in creation. And here is the key technical distinction. Human glory is acquired. You have to earn it, build it, buy it. Divine glory is inherent. It just is.
Okay, so God is glorious. Big deal. He's God. How does that help me, the guy standing in the graveyard worrying about my inevitable demise?
This is the massive claims the source makes. It says that while human glory is a finite resource that runs out when your heart stops beating, this divine glory is infinite and, wait for it, God is willing to share it.
Share it. Usually, glory's a zero-sum game. If I win the gold medal, you don't. If I get the CEO spot, you stay in the cubicle.
Exactly. Human glory is exclusive. Divine glory, according to this text, is inclusive. The source says God has planned and is pleased to share this glory with us. So instead of striving for a glory that ends in a graveyard, the listener is invited to pursue a glory that is shared by the Creator.
So we have this high-level, almost cosmic concept of shared glory. But what I appreciate about the source is that it doesn't leave us floating in the clouds. It crashes right back down to Monday morning at 9:00 a.m.
It really does. And this is where the cultural lineage of the source gets fascinating. We're looking at a Taiwanese pastor influenced by British theology, quoting a 17th century document.
You're talking about the catechism mentioned in the text.
Yes, the Westminster Shorter Catechism. It sounds dusty, I know. But the very first question in that document is timeless. It asks, what is the chief end of man? Or, in plain English, why are we here? What is the point of all this?
The ultimate existential question. And the source has an answer.
It does. The answer provided is to glorify God.
To glorify God, okay. But does that mean I need to quit my job and become a monk? Because the source lists some very specific, very normal jobs.
Right, and this is the application for the learner listening today. This is where the rubber meets the road. The source specifically lists workers in offices, factories, sales, and medical fields. It argues that demonstrating professionalism in these roles is actually the way you manifest that glory.
I love that. Professionalism as worship.
Exactly. Think about the modern workplace. We usually see two extremes. One is hustle culture. I work myself to death to build my empire, my brand, my glory. The other is what we call quiet quitting. I do the bare minimum because it's all meaningless anyway.
Both of those feel pretty empty eventually. One burns you out, the other bores you to death.
Right. The source offers a third way, stewardship. It argues that regardless of the job level, whether you are running the company or sweeping the floor, the diligence and excellence you bring to the work is how you glorify God. You aren't working for the applause of the boss. You're working to reflect the excellence of the Creator.
That's a heavy reframing of the daily grind. It means the quality of the spreadsheet or how clean the factory floor is actually matters beyond just the paycheck.
It elevates the mundane. The source explicitly contrasts this with individualism. It notes that modern people tend to accept things like the sun and rain as just natural phenomena that they are entitled to. We assume the wifey works and the sun comes up.
Yeah, we just expect the universe to cater to us.
Right. The source argues that the secular worldview is, I am the center. I work to build my pile of wealth and status. But the theological worldview presented here is, I am a manager of God's resources. I work to reflect His excellence. It changes the motivation completely. You aren't chasing the pomp of power that Thomas Gray wrote about. You're maintaining the estate, so to speak.
It puts the inevitable end in a different light. If you are building your own kingdom, death destroys it. If you are serving a higher kingdom, death is just a transfer of location.
Speaking of perspective, the source uses a really specific analogy to help us visualize the scale of a human life versus this glory. It talks about a grain of sand.
Yes, I caught that. The text says, compared to God's glory, a human life is like a grain of sand by the sea.
It's impossible to even weigh them in comparison.
Honestly, that makes me feel very small, insignificant even. If I'm just a grain of sand, why does my professionalism matter?
That's the paradox. You're a grain of sand in terms of time, but the source argues you are infinite in terms of value because of that connection to the Creator. To reinforce this, the source cites King Solomon from the Bible. Now, historically, Solomon is the guy who had everything: infinite wealth, power, hundreds of wives, fame.
The ultimate celebrity billionaire.
And his conclusion. The source quotes him saying, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity."
Vanity here meaning emptiness, right?
Yep.
Like smoke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source explains that when Solomon got old, he realized that without connection to the Creator, all those glorious riches and achievements just returned to nothing. They were empty. The grain of sand was just dust.
It's the pearl of great price concept the source brings up next.
Yes. The source asks, what is worth exchanging your life for? It describes faith not just as a safety net, but as a priceless pearl. The idea is that if you truly understood the value of this eternal glory versus the temporary glory of the graveyard, you would trade everything to possess the pearl.
So we've got the problem, human glory fades. The solution, God's glory is eternal. And the application, work as a steward. But the source also outlines a progression. It's not just a one-time decision. It talks about 3 stages of a believer. It feels almost like a maturity model.
It is a helpful framework. It breaks down the Christian life into 3 distinct levels. The first is being a saved Christian.
Okay, that's the starting line. You're in the club, you have the ticket.
Right. But the source implies you shouldn't stop there. You can be saved, but still be living a life that is chaotic or self-centered. The second stage is the victorious Christian.
Victorious over what?
In the context of the source, it implies overcoming the struggles of life, the temptation of that self-centeredness we talked about. It's living a life that actually works, that has power over the vanity. It's shifting from what can I get to how can I serve.
And the third stage, the final boss level.
The glorified Christian.
That sounds like we're back to the main theme.
We are. The glorified Christian is the ultimate goal mentioned in the text. This is someone who shares in the divine character. They are the faithful servant and the good steward. It's the person who, when they reach that graveyard at Stoke-Poges, isn't leaving their glory behind, but stepping into it.
It's a fascinating trajectory. It moves from just being safe to being effective, to being reflective of that glory.
And I think that connects back to the professionalism point. You can be a saved worker who does the bare minimum and complains about the boss. But a glorified worker, in the source's view, is someone whose work ethic, attitude, and integrity actually reflect the character of God.
Yeah.
It's a very high bar, but also a very dignifying one.
It really creates a sense of dignity in places we don't usually look for it. You know, we started this deep dive standing in a graveyard looking at the absolute end of life, but the source really wants us to focus on the during.
That's the paradox. You have to accept the grave to understand the glory. The source argues that until you realize your degrees, your power, and your bank account are just dust in the wind, to quote another classic, you won't value the thing that actually lasts.
It mentions specifically that knowledge, degrees, and power stay in the grave. That's a humbling thought for anyone who has spent years chasing a certification or a promotion.
He is. The source is very clear. The only thing that survives the transition of death is the soul, and specifically, a soul that has been connected to that living hope mentioned in 1 Peter.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've traveled quite a distance. We started on the cool summer grass of Stoke-Poges, walked through the poetry of Thomas Gray, dove into the theology of the Westminster Catechism, and landed right at our own desks at work.
It's a journey from the inevitability of death to the possibility of purpose. The source wants the listener to understand that glory isn't what you get from people, it's what you participate in with God.
It's a compelling argument, and it leaves us with a pretty provocative challenge to walk away with. The source asks us to consider where we fall on that ladder. Are we just saved, holding on to the ticket? Or are we pressing on to be victorious and glorified?
I think the question that lingers for me from this text is this. If everything you built today, your projects, your reputation, your assets, vanished tomorrow, exactly what part of your work would still exist? According to Pastor Hugh, only the parts done for God's glory have any permanence.
That is definitely a thought to chew on during the commute. It makes you look at your to-do list a little differently. Maybe that meeting isn't just a meeting.
It certainly changes the chief end of your afternoon.
Well, that's all we have time for on this deep dive. We hope this exploration of glory, poetry, and work gave you something solid to stand on.
Keep digging and keep asking the big questions.
We'll see you next time.